Airing first on Asheville FM, this is The Final Straw, a weekly anarchist, anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting from occupied Saligi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from people, projects, and struggles around the world, engaging in the long project toward liberation. This week, I'm super pleased to present an interview done with Sima Lee, who is a queer Afro-Indigenous hip-hop artist and community organizer of long standing, about a recent raid that occurred at Maroon House in D.C., where she organizes this March. We speak about Maroon House, its story, and what it is in the process of becoming, the ask for support in helping this movement build and heal, and many, many more things. Sima Lee has given some interviews recently about her political trajectory, her life, and relationship to anarchism in detail. Rather than have a repeat of those words, we will link her past interviews in the show notes, which you can find up at our blog or in our podcast feed. And our blog is thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org.
And now some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what? We'll come like a wall.
I suspect most people are oversaturated by the coverage of the Trump impeachment. And if you're an anarchist, particularly of the dumpster fire and ski mask variety, most of the coverage probably doesn't resonate with you. First, the larger narrative is a bit hard to follow. But second, the opposing sides in this drama are both appealing to our patriotism and our love of democracy and our fear that everything holy, from a delusional hierarch perspective, will be debased and corrupted and ruined if we only drink the other team's Kool-Aid. And since we don't give a flying and a rolling donut about patriotism, the less refuge of scoundrels, or about democracy, the swindle of the majority, the whole thing just seems like really loud white noise. It's like a long episode of hierarchs behaving badly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to break down this impeachment in a way that it's relevant to you. But before I begin, a disclaimer for anyone who might get the wrong impression that I favor one side over another. As I have often said, I make no distinction between Democrats and Republicans. They both make good hostages. Now, to boil the fat off this impeachment thing and give you the meat, it started with Trump's election. Russian intelligence services desperately wanted the dumbest guy in the room to get elected, and he did. Trump felt that if he acknowledged that the Russians interfered, it somehow makes him less legitimate than every other presidential despot. So out of childish pride, he can't validate the reality of the Russians wanting him to win. This creates a blind spot for him, makes him susceptible to get duped again by alternative stories that he wants to hear. The FBI and others investigated whether Trump's campaign colluded with those Russians. They concluded that Trump and his posse were entirely too disorganized and incoherent to have cooperated intelligently with Russian support efforts. So it isn't that Trump wasn't corrupt enough to enlist the Russians, it's that he's too stupid to do it right. Since his election, the revolving door of resignations has contributed to chronic instability in the Trump White House. So has the imprisonment of his closest advisors. This opened the door for Rudy Giuliani, a swindler and opportunist of the highest order, to become the Trump whisperer. Giuliani represents a number of corrupt folks in Ukraine whose interests can be served by ousting those who fight corruption. So the Trump whisperer convinced his boss to fire the ambassador there. Giuliani also pumped a bunch of fictions into Trump's head. Fictions that originate from a corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor who was a Russian sympathizer, and from two Russian operatives recently arrested for pumping millions into Republican causes. And the money likely originates with Russia. So Giuliani, the Trump whisperer, is a Russian puppet. And since Trump wants to accept this alternative fact thing that undermines the Russian interference narrative and makes him feel more legitimate, he bites on all this latest Russian propaganda like a big-mouthed bass chomping on a Pepsi can. As a consequence, this orange nitwit got draped off in a scheme to pressure Ukrainians to dig for information that doesn't exist. And he's so corrupt, as proven by his long history of corrupt business practices, and so thoughtless, as proven by his every utterance, that he attempted to strong-arm Ukraine into helping him out politically. Now, publicly exposed, he's ordered subordinates to break the law and refuse to cooperate with Congress. And Democrats and Republicans are now digging in and manning the barricades over this clown. Remember a while back I proposed a plan where we actually get Democrats and Republicans to shoot each other? Well, we no longer need the false flag drive-by to get it started. We only need to deliver the guns. By the time this process is over, we may watch senators and Republicans engage in open cannibalism, eating one another on the Senate floor. So the long and short of it, the whole U.S. government is plunged into a cycle of endless scandal and controversy and chaos while everything unravels. It's awesome. Trump has destroyed the United States. Stock up on cans of chicken noodle soup and bullets. Things could get hectic. Moving forward, there will be something of a trial in the Senate. To convict and oust Trump, it requires 67 votes. The Democrats make up 47 votes, so they need 20 Republicans to flush Trump like a goldfish. Talking heads roll their eyes at this, but the fact is, if public discontent rises, there is a threshold where Republican senators will see the wisdom in cutting bait with Trump and making a clean start with President Pence. The principal determination in that is whether the senators' re-elections will be hampered by allegiance to Trump. Self-interest, plain and simple. But all of that aside, there's only one person whose opinion of Trump really matters. He alone decides whether Trump remains as president. His name is Mark Milley. Mark Milley is a general in the U.S. Army. He's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. If the Senate votes to remove Trump from office, Milley is the only vote that matters. And here's why. During the Nixon impeachment, Nixon asked Henry Kissinger what would happen if the Senate ousted him, and he refused to leave. Kissinger was befuddled. He didn't understand what Nixon was getting at until Nixon started asking about the loyalty of the Joint Chiefs and what would happen if he ordered them to encircle the White House with Marines. I'm not making this up. Nixon considered this. The conversations were recorded. Now, in Nixon's case, he was a real wackadoodle, but he wasn't crazy enough to do that. But Trump is. So if the Senate votes to remove him, that's when the real action starts. Because, mark my words, Trump is going to call General Mark Milley into his office and ask Milley to remain loyal to him rather than to the Senate. And Trump appointed Milley. You'll see tanks in a ring around the White House, a declaration of martial law, maybe even the arrest of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. I'm not kidding. Let the Senate vote go against him and see what Trump does. He'll reduce this whole country to a banana republic. So, why all this matters? The Trump impeachment can really be the event that signals the implosion of the myth of democracy and the whole hierarch delusion. These crazy hierarchs are bringing it down faster than we can. Stock up on bullets and cans of soup. And duct tape. Lots of duct tape. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain in exile from Ohio at Buckingham Correctional in Dillon, Virginia. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can write to Sean Swain at his latest address at Sean Swain, number 2015638, Buckingham Correctional, P.O. Box 430, Dillwyn, Virginia, 23936. You can find his past writings, recordings of his audio segments, and updates on his case at SeanSwain.org, or now follow him on Twitter at SwainRocks.
But Sima Lee, thank you so much for coming onto the Final Straw radio show. It's a huge honor to get to talk to you. Would you just introduce yourself for listeners, like name, pronouns, anything you want, and anything you want listeners to keep in mind as they hear your words?
Right on. Well, thank you for having me on the show, Final Straw. I really appreciate it. I've definitely checked out some of the other podcasts in the past and really enjoyed them. And Feels good to be up here to be able to talk about what's going on. I'm Sima Lee, the RBG. I am a hip hop artist, radical hip hop artist, organizer, revolutionary. I founded Maroon Movement, Maroon House, and Food Clothing Resistance Collective, which has been operating since 2015. We are mutual aid, direct action, anti-fascist, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anarchist, autonomous Maroon Squad, basically just trying to show how we can cooperatively, collectively, communally have dual power as we build up to take down this empire. So whether that's us helping to feed the community, helping to give out free clothing and other items, or making radical music, or creating a space for people to be able to come together, to organize, to have culture, to talk about alternative medicine and alternative herbs and other things of that nature. That's the work that I've been deeply embedded in addition to helping to do anti-gentrification work and just building up in these urban centers as we try to take down the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex. It's a full-time job, just trying to not be oppressed. To put it frank, that is what I do. I try full-time to not be oppressed. So I appreciate to be able to be on the program.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I really resonate with that as well. Like, as the world is like moving more and more and more towards very, it's always been chronically unstable for folks who are like more marginalized by systems of power, but like becoming more unstable as far as our climate goes, as far as our systems of infrastructure go. So like I really appreciate projects like Maroon House and like the Maroon Collective for just taking power and taking care of themselves, and in the face of a lot of instability. And you've given a lot of really amazing interviews in the past as far as like your personal history, your political development goes, but and you've talked about Maroon House a lot, but I'd love to hear like a little bit about like how that project got started, and about like the meaning behind the maroon part of Maroon House.
Well, what came first in the process, to give a sped up version? I'm originally from Norfolk, Virginia, and that is pretty much surrounded by the military industrial complex. The largest naval installation in the world is Norfolk, Virginia, and Hampton Roads area in general. So, from an early age, this is what I saw. I saw the military industrial complex for what it's worth. But in addition to that, I saw everyone else suffering from low wages and oppression. Virginia is where a large amount of liberated people who were once enslaved escaped into the swamps, and in particular the Great Dismal Swamp, and connected with other people who escaped harsh conditions. Sometimes they were deserters from war, sometimes it was other indigenous groups that were native to the land, and they would build what we would call today dual power within those swamps, creating a community of resistance. So when other people would escape, they had an oasis, a place to go. They made their own rules and regulations and created their own law of the land outside of the rule of the day, which still was legalized slavery. So much of how I developed my thought came from being from that area of Virginia, and the history from 1619 until, and the history of Nat Turner and Gabriel Prosser and others who, basically took it upon themselves to try and liberate themselves, and to, in conjunction with others, and strong abolitionist movements were built and upheld in Virginia. And so I took the concept of people working together and coming together. Of course, the Maroons are not just in Virginia. Maroons were everywhere Europeans dropped African bodies. So we're talking, there were Maroons in Haiti and Maroons in Jamaica, and you have the Quilombos in Brazil, and you have the Garifuna in Honduras, and there's just about everywhere that you go in Latin America and the Caribbean and in other places that Africans created independent resistance and community. And so when I came to Washington, D.C., I attended quite a lot of other people's events showing solidarity and just trying to learn, the history and processes of what was going on locally. But I felt that there needed to be a place where people could come together from other organizations from within the community to be able to have a place to build and create and express themselves and have culture. And similar to many other spaces that have been like that in the past, it's not a model that we invented. This is usually something that many people do in order to survive. And so it's just basically a space where survival programs can be done is what I felt that we should have. And so after the Peace House split from the particular house that we were living in, which is another long-time mutual aid, direct action, anti-capitalist group, I continued in that same space in Washington, D.C., and named it the Maroon House. And so Maroon House was intentionally Black, intentionally queer, and intentionally radical and all-encompassing of what was going on at the times in Washington, D.C., which meant also cannabis advocacy and education. This would lead directly to why we got raided. And I don't know if that's a lead in question, but this is just giving a background of how we started and previewing to how the space ended, because we did have all these different radical elements within it, as well as entertainment, as well as I say, cannabis education and advocacy after the passing of Initiative 71 that legalized cannabis in Washington, D.C. So Maroon House basically operated in the middle of a neighborhood and connected everyone so that we could open up community gardens and have free stores and free schools. And it was just a beautiful, flourishing village. And I wanted something that I didn't see in other spaces. And I think it's very important for us as organizers to do that, because quite often we read books and we see what others do. And outside of our imaginations, we blindly try to imitate that instead of creating new models that fit our reality. And so I felt that it was important, whether it was successful or whether it failed, that it was important to hold down a space and operate it on our own terms and something that we felt reflected us. And the movement aspect of it, where it transcends from a Maroon House to a movement, is trying to get others to duplicate it and replicate that, to have their own houses and centers and co-ops and collectives and communes and farms, to be able to, again, have dual power and be free within this very, very oppressive system that is just, pushing us all down. And these are traditional indigenous ways of resistance as well as anarchist. And so I can't just say it's all just anarchist models that I'm using, but it is a combination of a bit of both. And so that's how Maroon House came about. It was very much needed and it was very successful. We got to a year before we raided. It was actually not long after our 1-year anniversary that we were raided by the Metropolitan Police Department, on the context of, well, your neighbor's complaint. Well, one of the things that we knew that wasn't true, because one of the things that we did not want to do was gentrify an already gentrified Washington, D.C. And so we made sure that the core of what we were doing is building up the community. And when I say building up the community, I mean the community within the community, meaning connecting everyone, because there are always separate communities within community. But to have a hub where everyone could come together and we could talk to people about what's going on within the neighborhood, within the larger Washington, D.C. area, that's what was important to me. And so there was no way we were going to set up there and just have events without having connections to our neighbors. And so our neighbors would come to our free stores and the People's Pantry. Our neighbors would come when we would have events. Our neighbors would even come when we would have classes or concerts or cannabis education events. Like, it was a broad spectrum of people that would come through, because we made sure that everyone felt comfortable as long as you weren't oppressive to others. So we knew that the neighbors had not called because we actually knew our neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was basically just intimidation, because the actual sergeant who came in, and this was a violent raid, mind you. We're talking, they had AR-16s and red beams on us. This was a violent raid. This was meant to terrorize the community and us, to set an example. But the police officers told us that they knew of our work, they were aware of our work, they respected our work, and then offered, as they're taking people out in cuffs at the same time that they're doing that, offered to donate to us for our free clothing giveaway. And they actually did. The very next day, they dropped clothing off as a kind of, insult to injury. After they've terrorized our home and brought dogs in and pointed guns at us, they offered us, some of the clothing that they had and donated it. But what was important to me is that they told us that they knew the work that we were doing. Which means that they had been watching us. I don't know how long they had been watching us, but they definitely had. And so that is something that happened in March of this year. And as a consequence of it, we had to revamp the type of events that we had, because we knew that they were looking at events of anything of a cannabis nature in particular.
Yeah. That is a lot. Like I'm so sorry that y'all were forced to endure something so heinous. And like, to add insult to injury, the cops being like, yeah, we'll donate to your thing. It's like, well, I mean, I shouldn't be surprised at the like ridiculous, inhuman nature that cops move through the world in. And I really connected to what you were saying about like the flexibility of the organizing model that Maroon House had, where you're like, yeah, people read about stuff in books and they try to copy it verbatim or word for word. And I think that kind of tends to perpetrate a lot of the problematic patterns that people have vis-a-vis like settler colonialism or toxic whiteness or what have you. And they're like, oh, we'll just go back to the land and like buy some land that we have no relationship to and that we have no idea whose land it is actually. And so I really connected with that.
So it was very important that our space, even though it was ran by Black queer women in films, it was very important that it was Brown and Indigenous centered in addition to that. And it very much was. And so the Black and Brown unity aspect was something that was always in effect, as well as bringing in white leftists. And we felt that our job, to be quite frankly, was to make sure white leftists left feeling a little less toxic, a little less settlerish, a little less centered, because you cannot be the center of an imperialist movement when your ancestors were the imperialists. And when your current family members are the imperialists, something has to give on that when we are on stolen indigenous land and indigenous people are not at the forefront of what we're doing, or they are, but you're not listening to them. So part of what we had to do within that Maroon House was to treat every white leftist who came into that space and white anti-racist as the potential next Marilyn Buck or John Brown. That's how I looked at it. And so when you leave, if you did not feel that way when you came in, I want you to feel that way when you go out. If you came here as an ally, I want you to leave as an accomplice. So the space was so important. It wasn't just because of mutual aid. It was because of the living teaching. And I am an early childhood educator, and I give lectures, and I teach adults as well. But it's the living model that people need to see, and it's the communication that they don't always get. That was very much important about this space. And so I talk about that space a lot because I want to see others, again, recreate spaces like this and for people to, help do the work of building it up, because it was extremely difficult to do that work. To open your doors and to let strangers in is a lot. And there are different models to do it. That was just the way that we chose to do it, to open up our home. But there are different ways to do it. But because we lived there and we worked there and we taught there and we played there, when the police came, they disrupted all of that. So right now, there is no Maroon House DC. It's not because we were not able to sustain the events that we had that kept the space up. We had to revamp them, but we continued to have events. We continued to have people coming, because I refuse to let them destroy what we're doing. We know, like, this is the anniversary not long ago of Chairman Fred Hampton, and that was a raid that happened. We know how they raided the Los Angeles Panthers with the first use of SWAT. We know how they, raided the Philadelphia Panthers, and infamous pictures were taken of them in their underwear and to humiliate them. And they do things of this nature to shake you and break you. And so, because things had changed a bit within the demographics of the people who were in the collective, with some members having already left, new people being added who we really probably hadn't vetted the best, and things that kind of, I don't want to say kind of, pretty much seemed like sabotage from within now, not just coming from the state. So you have sabotage from within, from newer people, newer faces that we don't really know as much. I made the tactical decision to retreat so that I would not end up the next freedom fighter who has been murdered in their sleep by the police, or sabotaged from within by new members that we hadn't vetted or hadn't had a chance to vet as much. And so now we're in Baltimore, and we're no longer in Washington, D.C., but the work continues. And we do want to get another Maroon House. That is the goal.
Absolutely. That's amazing. That's really making me think of an interview that we did a couple of months ago with a like rad space in LA called La Concha, and they
I've heard
were
of them.
they were having a lot of trouble being infiltrated by like authoritarian Maoist, like state communists basically, and they were talking about that as being something that they were really like keeping eyes on, as well keeping eyes on infiltration from the state as well as infiltration from like other sort of quote leftist groups, because
Absolutely.
like I feel like anti-authoritarian leftist resistance and energy is building on Turtle Island, and so like resistance to that from like bad actors is also building. But
Oh yeah.
but I'd love to hear like, how are people holding up who were working in Maroon House? Like, how are people doing, and how can listeners help support y'all? How can listeners like send you love if they are like inclined to do so?
Well, I'll be honest, because, I think about, again, in history, we've learned from people who have gone through things, and we look at it and try to relate to it. And I think about how so often a lot of the revolutionaries that we've studied, especially those from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they would go through these horrible things of state repression or infiltration, or even sometimes, and I have to be careful when I say infiltration, because I invited people to live within the perimeters of this space because they fit the model of what we were doing. But it's not always like some strange person walking into it. It could be people that you know who end up doing a 180 of whatever they were doing when they originally met you, or said the right things to get into the door and then change what they were doing afterwards. Or there is sabotage by way of not helping, not assisting. There's sabotage by the way of doing things to suck the morale out. There's sabotage by ways of leaving doors unlocked when you're in the middle already of military situations, or leaving windows open, or things that are odd, or you find something might be in your food that originally wasn't in your food or in your drink. There are different ways to sabotage that may or may not even be connected to the state. For me, I don't know if those things happen from the state 100%, or if it was just personal or other things. But all of these things are important when you're thinking about having sort of open memberships into your space. So for us, it has been rally our comrades, get support to be able to get out of the space, which we totally, absolutely did, with a lot of people across the country supporting us so that we could get to another space in Baltimore, which originally our first space was in Baltimore. And so we're returning back to Baltimore. Our first Maroon House was actually in West Baltimore. So right now what we're doing is healing, because we feel that we got to just keep going, and we don't have time to heal from the everyday trauma. And it is important to heal your body and your mind after you've been through something violent. And we deserve that. And I say we, meaning revolutionaries. We tend to think that, oh, shake it off. My ancestors had so much worse, but we've got to take care of ourselves, or we're not going to be here, as the indigenous folks say, as myself, Afro-Indigenous, for the 7th generation. We're not going to be here to leave a legacy for them if we burn out. So what we're doing now is, first off, trying to heal. We're just now talking about what we went through. This happened in March, and it was so traumatic. We didn't want to talk about it because we had no idea, was another raid coming? Was there more sabotage coming? We're also learning to trust again. I'm learning to be able to let my guard down a bit and still attend other events and speak with comrades and meet with them, even though one would be extremely paranoid after all the things that happen. And I am extremely cautious right now. But that's what's going on right now. We're healing, revamping, rebuilding, and refocusing. And we're doing different things basically to be able to come up with a new space. And however that plays itself out, we're trying to connect with more people on social media. We may set up a blog and start doing some art-connected projects, some zines, just to be able to put out more information, to tell our story. People can follow us on social media. Food Clothing Resistance Collective is on Facebook, and it's on Twitter and all the major social media sites. Maroon Movement is also, and myself, Sima Lee. Some of our main core comrades are no longer within the vicinity of the space, but we still keep in good contact with each other, and they're treading on with what they're doing as individuals. We're looking right now for the first time to actually expand and recruit, because we always kept it within the house, the members, because it was a little easier for me to feel that we could, make sure that we knew everybody. That didn't necessarily work, but at least for the first year it did. So right now we are actively looking for the first time to expand and recruit outside of the house. And I'll be working on that probably for the next couple of months, what I want that to look like as far as the process, and what we want it to look like as far as the process of how we go about doing that and how we go about letting people know. But right now we're just trying to add more people on social media and get people to reach out to us there. And then we connect, in person.
That's awesome. And thank you so much for giving voice to something, I feel like, this very complex and difficult to articulate phenomenon in leftist circles of like sabotage by way of not helping out, or sabotage by way of like doing odd stuff. And I feel like that's not something that we have so much on our radars. So thank you for speaking on that, because I feel like it's not spoken of enough.
It should have been talked about really, really, really a lot after Occupy, and we dropped the ball and went right into more pushing, and we did not unpackage all of the things that we saw that was very weird, very sporadic, random types of acts that just didn't make any, rational sense towards the movement, and we didn't unpack that. And I'm saying that as anarchists, like we really should have talked about that and what it looks like to vet comrades and to find out more about each other, while, still not wanting to invade on people and not to be authoritarian. But this is important. We're doing radical work in major urban cities, or in rural areas where definitely everybody knows everybody, and who are these people coming into this situation and that. Like, we really need to be more careful. And I know we get into the theory a lot, but the praxis is so important. When you get into acting out what you've learned, you've got to be cautious with security. And our security culture is lacking across the board, not just anarchists, my revolutionary socialist comrades as well. Like, our security culture really needs to be tightened up with everything that we know from COINTELPRO. We should know better by now.
Absolutely. That resonates with me really hard. And, just learning about our own, you mentioned COINTELPRO, and like learning about our own revolutionary history is, I think, a first step to understanding what kind of threats we face from the state, and learning how to walk a line between like not trying to be, paranoia is, I think, a healthy thing sometimes. Like, there's healthy paranoia because sometimes there's really bad actors out there, but there's like a sort of overblown paranoia that tends to be like exclusive or exclusionary or paranoia for paranoia's sake, and learning to walk the line of being safe and getting yours and your comrades' backs.
Oh, yeah.
While
there's
not,
a thin line between just being, like you said, healthy skepticism and then being these rogue Maoist units that are beating up comrades. Like, that's not what I'm talking about.
I know. Not at all.
That's not what I'm talking about when I say that we need to have a better security culture. In fact, those things raise red flags of provocateurism. So it's just a part of study, and it's just a part of growth. This is what you have to deal with when you're organizing we're in the heart of the empire. What makes us think we're not going to be scrutinized and watched every step of the way? What makes us think that they're not watching our social medias? Like, I just gave mine out at Sima Lee RBG on Twitter and on IG, and Sima Lee on Facebook. But I know that they're already watching those things. So we have to, even when we put out public information, watch what we put out. How much do we want to give face-to-face? How much do we want to give electronically? These are all things that we should constantly be thinking about, because they're constantly after us. Whether we know it or not, they are. They're not going to make an announcement. They didn't announce that they were coming to our house. They just came and then they went away. And incidentally, all charges were dropped from that raid. I didn't say that part. So no one has been charged. There are no charges. No one's in jail. It was just a complete disruption and just a violent act just for the sake of doing it.
I'm glad no charges, but obviously there's
I am too.
Yeah, but obviously there's enduring trauma, as there would be naturally if you have that kind of shit happen in your house. So you are a musician and you are a hip hop artist of some long standing. I'd love to hear about, so there was a call for people to download your most recent album, Trap Liberation Army, and there was a call for donations via that platform. I'd love to hear about that album, your process in creating it, and some themes that it focuses on.
Right on. Trap Liberation Army is an homage to Black Liberation Army, which was an underground fighting unit that splintered off from the Black Panther Party, but there were members who are also members of Republic of New Africa and other Black liberation units who felt that the fight, above ground fight, could desperately use armed resistant units in the underground. And they worked in conjunction with brown liberation movements and white liberation movements. I mentioned Marilyn Buck, and then, David Gilbert and so many others, Laura Whitehorn and so many others were a part of actions taken with the Black Liberation Army. And so I thought of the proliferation of trap music, and that's the sound of the time. And so I thought how, I could combine the two concepts of, why don't we have a trap liberation army? That's a bit, more of a modern type of a twist on the same thing. Trap being the hood, the ghetto, and in particular, drugs, as far as people using drugs to make an income in a oppressive imperialist setting. The colonized people might have to take measures to make money by any means necessary. With Trap Liberation Army, it's about how about we don't do that? How about we look for alternatives by any means necessary, just for income, but for liberation? So it's just a twist on it. There are good and bad things within the hood, and I'm from the hood. I'm from the trap. I'm from the concept of not necessarily drug dealing, but it was surrounding me. It was completely engulfed in the community that I was in. It was in the middle of the crack era. And I always wanted to be liberated from that paradigm of suffering and pain. And this is not to shame people who use drugs by any stretch of the imagination, but there was much suffering and pain, and it led to the mass incarceration of my people. And we're still dealing with it right now.
This is the Final Straw Radio Show, and I'm your host, William Goodenough. You're listening to Afro-Indigenous queer hip-hop artist Sima Lee speak about her work organizing in Baltimore and surviving and rebuilding after police repression. We are going to hear the track It's On, which is the opening track from her newest album, Trap Liberation Army, which is out from Soul Trust Records 2017.
We knocking taste out of racist mouth in the South Chule. Them red hats can catch hot shots, pop up that toupee. Touche, Sima Lee, please watch what you say. That lad in that DC water must got you goofy. Nothing on my newest mission. Snatching mics like Bob did, new edition. Doing dabs in the kitchen, giving jabs if you snitching. Strictly for goons in they rooms. Blunts and tunes, some MF Doom. Morals not put the gun away. Sima Lee from Young's Park, a dark slave run away. Nothing but a lion coming right where the hunter stay. Hunted on the interstate, original, no imitate. Would you know the difference if you always listen to the fake? But this is soul trust. We turn everything we do into gold dust. When all of your golden cash turn to old rust, we diddy bop to the fortress. We gorgeous. Light it up, 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 light it up. Black Indian hood, red so barrio. If the track breaks backs, it's probably waliro. In the booth, it's a fact that I'm a prodigal. Dump the pack in the grinder, break it to particles. Yeah, my heart is bold. Thug life is hard to hold on to. Taking all that cheddar, making fondue. They taking everything like China did to Rob True. Standing rock down to a rock, they tryna bomb you. That's why we mob trolls. So when my crew mask up, it's just like a Luke song. Face down and ass up. Black Liberation Army at the brink, truck. Hands off the Honda Free Mutulu. What you think, bruh? See, everybody wanna be the vanguard. Got to be damn smart to handle these land sharks. No names and numbers, remember the landmarks. Roll up on them pics and politicians where they vans park is on. Light it up, 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 light it up. Light it up, light it up, light it up, light it up, light it up.
And so Trap Liberation Army is a project that talks about the community, talks about the hood, talks about liberation and what it looks like, gives homage to those who fought in the past. Because Black Liberation Army definitely used to fight against the surge of drugs that was coming into the Black community. And my elders were a part of some of those units that taught me as a youth when I was in the community of the Movement, which was connected to political prisoner Imam Jamil Al-Amin. So it's just a way of me like mixing the old with the new and pro-cannabis, pro-sarcasm, but very anti-imperial and something you can nod your head to because sometimes anti-imperial music is kind of boring and just,
Yeah.
I mean, it is, it can be,
Yeah.
to make it more interesting, to give it a little bit of funk, to reflect the background that I come from. I call myself a trap or ghetto intellectual because I don't run away from my poor background. I think we tend to look at poverty as something that reflects us as opposed to something that is done to us. And so I'm celebrating the beauty and the ugliness that comes within the trap and our just ability to liberate ourselves and look for a better future. I guess a lot of people call that Afro-futurism, but that is what the album is about. And through Bandcamp, we've been able to get a lot of new followers and people who want to support the project. And also Bandcamp will recommend other music to you. So it's a way that you can find out, if I like this particular song, can you recommend me something else? And so it's a way, I hope that they found new artists after they listen to my music that are similar to the vein of what they're doing. But I feel like we need freedom music right now. We need a revolutionary background to what we're doing while we're tagging and feeding people and you know, doing everything that we're doing. So I'm looking forward to, you know, introducing my music to more new people, but also creating hopefully some new music in 2020 to be able to put out there so that people like Franklin Lopez, Stimulator, can stop asking me when my next album is out. But I'm really proud of the fact that he's digging my music and also that it was featured in the documentary on Sub Media, in the documentary And You Don't Stop for Trouble. Because I got them to get introduced to some comrades that I've liked their music for a while and I didn't really know them, but I got to talk to them and stuff after that, like Lee Reed and Soul. So that was pretty cool. Music is a cultural weapon, and I've been involved in hip hop for a very, very long time, and it's always been my favorite expression. And so just using it like Dead Prez, Public Enemy, X-Clan, other groups that inspired me to help and boost the morale of the people.
Absolutely. I loved that episode of Trouble that focused on hip hop
Yeah,
and like
that
you.
was awesome.
Yeah, it was so awesome. And La Marea, and I'm forgetting
Mhm.
who else was in there, but like,
Mike Crenshaw, and it was awesome.
and I had a question, and it's completely slipping my mind. Like listening to you talk, but it was are you listening to anything right now that is like giving you strength, or other artists that you want to plug?
I always say the same thing. I want to plug independent artistry and labels and collectives that I know of, that I've been a part of, because they are the ones that inspire me. And three different entities, collectives, independent labels that I'm connected to are Soul Trust Records out of Virginia Beach, Virginia, which is the who I released Trap Liberation Army out from. And these are comrades that I've known for a very long time. They're my friends, really good friends, but we decided to have a space for independent artistry together, and we put out some really good work. So Soul Trust Records is just one big, massive of incredible artists that people should check out. Beat Conductors is a local collective in DC, Maryland, Virginia area that has a lot of beat contests as far as like producer displays and battles. And I mean, some really incredible instrumentals are played at these events, and a lot of artists from across the country are gathering. And it's a competition, but it's more of building up, a family of musicians and artists traveling together and explaining and working together how we create in our creative processes, tutorials and classes. And it's been pretty cool working with them as well. And then also Guerrilla Republic, which is a clothing label as well as a massive collective also of artists that the brother Rob and Iz have been doing this for quite some time now, and people have really resonated. It's been really heavily focused on Black and Brown resistance and inspired by the Haitian Revolution. And that body of revolutionary clothing and revolutionary art and music combining has been a beautiful thing. And the artist that people might most associate with Guerrilla Republic would be Immortal Technique. But there are many, many, many talented artists that are affiliated with Guerrilla Republic, and I've had a pleasure to work with some of the comrades in Washington, D.C. So I would tell people, if you're looking for radical music to inspire you, to definitely check out Soul Trust, Guerrilla Republic, and Beat Conductors. Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
that. Yeah. One of
Always like plugging my friends.
plug yeah, hell yeah. Um, One of the like last questions that I had scripted out is about any words that you had on like your relationship to queerness, and like the relationship that queerness had to Maroon Collective and to the Food, Clothing, and Resistance Collective. Like you, as somebody who's moved through and navigated and worked in a lot of political and social spaces, what things have like come up for you vis-a-vis like queerness, and how have things changed over the years that you can locate, if that makes any sense?
Right. No, yeah, change has been dramatic, from losing spaces, just the culture of queer visibility is a bit different now, and queer people are taking it upon themselves. I mean, as they always have, to be able to represent themselves, but it's connecting in a different way, where I see, while on the one hand there's more of a social acceptance via visibility, it doesn't necessarily reflect all the time within movement circles and what leadership looks like. But people are loud and out there, and they're doing it, and I'm very proud of the development of the queer folks that are out there and really getting it. Queer, trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, such as myself. We're really taking it upon ourselves to attack the heteropatriarchy that has been the focal of so many movements. I mean, something that really pushes people away is a lack of feeling like they can be themselves. And in far too many leftist circles, there is homophobia, transphobia, and sexism. And so the importance of me being myself and being comfortable. I decided a long time ago, either I was going to just be myself or I was going to play a role to fit in. And the choice I made very early on was to just be myself. So I've never had to deal with a lot of resistance to me as far as anyone saying anything to me in a hurtful manner. I know I've been excluded from certain things though because of my sexual orientation and probably even more so my gender nonconformity as a masculine woman. But I really don't give a damn because they couldn't have been my comrades if you're going to make such superficial choices, not to judge me by, I'm not going to say morality, principles and ideological realness, because a lot of us say that we have ideological, followings, but we don't act through with them. And so my integrity wouldn't allow a lot of people to come up to me and say certain things and oppress me. But I know that I've been left out of certain things because of my queerness. And we've had incidents within white queer spaces where we did not feel comfortable as Black and brown queer bodies. And I see how my trans sisters are treated, and I see how my trans brothers are quite often just ignored and forgotten. And just across the board, I see how people are just taking it upon themselves to create their own houses, their own zines, their own films, their own music. And this body of resistance is coming out from queer people that is a continuation of what we've been doing for over 40 years. And it's just passing from one generation to another to keep it going. It's not easy to be in Pan-African circles, to be openly queer. It's not easy. I mean, I've navigated through Pan-African socialist circles, Islamic circles, revolutionary socialist circles, and again, quite often queer people, trans people are not centered in these circles. And so I've always felt that I would be that lance that would strike in the middle of that. And you're going to have to deal with me, and you're going to have to deal with my comrades, and you're going to deal with us, not as us feeling like we're waiting for your acceptance, but you're just going to have to get with our program. And that's how I've always felt about it. I'm not begging for acceptance. I'm taking my stake in this world that is all interconnected. And so in that aspect, my visibility is my weapon. I want you to see this masculine body who's not toxic and who's not following by, the gender norms that you profess so well every day in the heteropatriarchy, where my visibility, the visibility of my comrades and a collective that was ran by Black queer women in films was very important, and it is very important. And so I will continue to do this work, even though I know that I'm probably not wanted in certain spaces. I'm not going to ask, can I be liberated? Can I be free? Can I be treated, like anyone else? I'm going to take it. And so that's always been how I viewed it. I have been a victim of hate crimes. I have been assaulted. I have been brutalized. I've had a lot of things happen to me as far as sexual and physical and mental violence. I am a survivor. And I would tell any other queer youth that are out there and who are organizers to make sure that you build an intentional family to protect you and to buffer you and to laugh and to cry with, because it's very, very, very important. We're trying to make worlds within worlds within worlds. And it's okay to create that. And it looks like nothing that has been done before. It's all right. It's okay. It's okay to create something new and to be relentless with that. And so, yes, I don't know. I'm always meeting. We met a lot of queer people that came to this space, and I didn't realize until after we were packing up just how many different people that we touched with this work. So I'm so eager to get another space so that queer people can feel that way in Baltimore as well, with a particular spot. Not saying that there aren't spots already, but to add to it, because Baltimore is an incredible resistance town, and I just want to add to it with another space and reach out to the queer Black and brown people here, and trans Black and brown people here, and gender nonconforming, non-binary comrades. Like, we're on the verge of changing the reality And no more would you see our faces on the fronts of newspapers as some things to be objectified and laughed at. You will respect us. And that's just what it is. And so that's how I take my day-to-day life as a queer activist. Not an activist, really, just I'm queer, and you're gonna deal with me, and you're gonna respect me, and this is how it is, and we have a right to live and exist. And it's not very easy always, especially if you're visible. But this is the work that must be done so that we can be free, because nothing's given to you. You kind of have to take it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I really resonate with that as somebody whose subjectivity is a mixed race trans man who either gets, like, as near as I can figure, coded as either white or Arab, depending on who is doing the coding and what kind of situation is going on. So I very much resonate with, like, the taking space, carving out safe space, and also, like, I have seen, queer spaces become a bit less toxic, a bit less white, a bit more taking queerness's history as something that was very much, like, spurred on, given energy by, and created by Black and brown queer people, as, and as something that has, like, been tried to be co-opted into, like, HRC, cis, gay, rich, white kind of circles. But we have a long way to go still. And
I see a lot of the reason that gets co-opted is because of the economic situation that queer and trans bodies are put into, because of the oppression that we face. So oftentimes we feel like we're unemployable or we're easily fireable outside of the nonprofit industrial complex. And so here comes the nonprofit industrial complex. Some of our greatest queer and trans minds right now are working at jobs at nonprofits, and they hate them, but they have to eat. And sex work is criminalized, and you can't do this and you can't do that. And so it's so many things that you can't do. You can't have events and have a space in the middle of Washington, D.C. and just be self-sustainable, apparently. So people end up in the non-industrial complex and their ideas are stolen. They're not respected, and they're still underpaid, and still whiteness is centered at the end of the day. And it's still white supremacy. It's still a platform for the othering of people while they're using these people for they would bring in, like, it's almost as if they have a checklist. Okay, I need one queer Black woman. I need a trans man.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Trans people are speaking up for themselves, and people are starting to really, 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 really resonate with what's going on. So let's get a bunch of trans people and you don't respect those trans people that you've got to come in, and you're not paying them what they're due, and you're taking their ideas, and you're literally using queer and trans bodies, and it's a big problem. But I don't know, how do we get around that other than creating grassroots orgs of our own and not giving all our great ideas to these nonprofits? Maybe, I don't know. But that's a serious thing, and I feel sorry for my comrades. I see you out there. I know you're drained. I know you don't want to be in these spaces, whether it's it could even be just a different type of nonprofit that isn't queer, but you feel drained and you feel used and you feel marginalized within people that are saying they're doing social justice work. I know that hurts, and I hope that you can liberate yourselves from that, because it's not a good feeling.
Yeah, it is not a good feeling. And I think, like, creating projects like La Concha, like Maroon House, like Maroon Collective, is a really viable step in the direction of real queer liberation from white supremacy,
Absolutely.
and real, like, liberation period from white supremacy, because, like, white supremacy gave us all of this shit that we're dealing with.
And capitalism, and so it all has to be toppled. And so while I'm educating the heteropatriarchy, I'm educating white queer and trans folks as well, because you're not separate from that. And you might not be embraced fully as you might want to be. Sometimes I think people just want to be embraced more by the empire. Like when we're fighting to have trans and queer people be in the military, like, that's not an advancement for queer and trans bodies. to be in the military. But I understand why some people do it, because this is the only way that they can get medical and other things. And so like we're often put into these situations because again, we're not free and we're not liberated. And while we're organizing and losing spaces, more spaces are popping up. And so it's just we're just going to have to keep pushing, for our independence and autonomy, and to be heard and to lead. Even as we're talking about horizontal leadership or temporarily, it's still important to have Black, brown, indigenous, queer, trans, two-spirit bodies in these spaces. And I don't see that from a lot of white leftist groups. And so people are organizing their own. And a lot of the new groups that I see popping up are led by queer and trans people. And I just say, what's up? Right on. Keep doing it. Power to the people.
Well, if you ever come through Asheville, it's been noted before, like both on air and off air, that pretty much literally all of the anarchists here are queer or trans. Like, it's notable when you find like a cishet person who's an anarchist. We're like, oh, it's the unicorn,
Now there's the unicorn. That's interesting. But that's what I'm saying. Create your own reality. We can flip the reality around, and that is wonderful. Now I need to go to Asheville.
Yeah, come through.
Yes.
We'll show you a good time. We have all the vegan barbecue you could ever eat.
But I'm ready.
Or any kind of barbecue, whatever. Like, people should eat what they want. Sima Lee, those are all the questions that I had scripted out. But is there anything that's like on your mind that you want to give voice to, or any like words that you'd leave listeners with as like parting words?
Feed the people. Go out and feed people. Go out and give people clothing. Sabotage capitalism. Like, sabotage it. You see it cracking. You see it breaking. You see it lashing out, across Latin America and the Caribbean and here and Asia and the Middle East. People are lashing out because capitalism is no good. And we see it, whether it's Chile or Bolivia, Ecuador, Haiti, Paris. People are resisting. And it's time for Turtle Island, so-called North America, to start sabotaging the wheels of the empire, because other people need for us within the belly of this beast to do that. We need it for ourselves, first and foremost. I'm living in Baltimore, Maryland, which is segregated. It is very much segregated. It has a higher population of men in jail, Black men in jail in Maryland than in Mississippi. And again, I'm going to say it again, it's segregated. We're living in segregated cities. We're living in a place where food stamps are being cut by the masses. We're living in a place where corporations we've known since children are closing. We're living in a time where what it looks like to make money is changing. Hasten that. Hasten what work looks like. Redefine what work is. Redefine bartering. Redefine what family looks like. We're redefining everything, gender. Everything. Redefine it, evaluate it. It's good to learn from the past, but also learn from the mistakes. I'm just anxious to see what 2020 looks like as we go into these ridiculous elections and all of this stuff that's going on, whether they impeach Trump or not. As long as we have imperialist capitalism ruling over us, it doesn't matter what the figurehead is. So I just want to see my comrades across the country, across the globe, to hasten the fall of imperialist capitalism, of racism, of sexism, of ableism, all of the things that have been impeding us and holding us back. Get your trans power, get your queer power, your Black, your brown, your indigenous power. And like even Fred Hampton said, you poor white people, get your power too. But it cannot be on the back of your comrades and on the platform of white supremacy. We need you to be your European descendant selves, and whiteness has to go as far as a category of social political oppression. So we would like to see the abolition of whiteness and bring back the greenness of our land and the blues of our water and our skies, and deal with this ecology that is just crying out for humans to just chill. This is where we are. We have so much work to do. It's like, I don't know how to give any one thing other than to say, push it all. If you think you're pushing too much, I tell you, you're not pushing enough. Push. Let's see the end of this oppression, and let's create a new reality.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you so much for your words and your energy and your heart and your mind. Like, it's been a beautiful experience for me getting to talk to you, and I hope that we get to like build and fight and work together in future.
Absolutely. I plan on going as much as possible up and down the East Coast, down south, and maybe even I've been invited a couple times out west, so maybe I might finally get to Cali and Seattle and Portland and other spots that I know the comrades are always doing their thing. I'm looking forward to meeting anybody and everybody who's down to like really push anti-capitalism as far as we can in these colonized territories.
You just heard Sima Lee, who is an Afro-Indigenous queer hip-hop artist, speak on her work, queerness, the Maroon Movement, and how to get and stay involved in struggle. You can learn more information about her work and related topics by following all the social media links. She can be found at Sima Lee RBG on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also find the Food, Clothing, and Resistance Collective and the Maroon Movement up on Facebook by just simply searching their names. You can also follow her work on Bandcamp by going to simalee.bandcamp.com, and there you can listen to Trap Liberation Army, and there are ways to donate to any of the various causes that you've been hearing about as well. We will post links to all that, plus further interviews she has done, one on the Solecast, who is a member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and one on academics in cars with Jared Ball. A link will also be there to the Trouble documentary, And You Don't Stop, out last year from Submedia. You can find all this info up at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org or on any major podcasting platform.